Okay, we should be live. We're going to do a quick check and make sure everything is working correctly on Facebook and YouTube. Hasn't failed us just yet, but just want to do a check just before we get started, make sure everything is working as it should. It looks like we should be okay on the Alabama Museum of Natural History Facebook page. So if you want to join us there, just head over to facebook.com/ALMNH if you want to watch from Facebook. And we also should be live on the UA Museum's YouTube channel, which you can find at youtube.com/UA Museum. So if you prefer to watch it on YouTube, you can check us out there. So we are live on both of those locations. So I will go ahead and get us started today. Welcome to today's Museums from Your Home live stream presented by the University of Alabama Museums. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I'm the Communication Specialist for UA Museums. And today I'm joined by Dr. John Abbott, who is the Director of Museum Research and Collections. How are you doing today, John? Looks
very good, Rebecca. How about you?
Yeah, good. Just so our audience knows, we have a little bit of a slight delay. So this, just as a reminder, this is live. So anything can happen. We might have some delay or connectivity issues. Just hang in there with us in case we have any issues. And because it is live, you have the opportunity to ask Dr. Abbott any questions. If you have any Dragonfly questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section. So Dr. Abbott, how should we get started today?
Well, I thought I would talk a little bit about dragonfly migration. I am an entomologist and an odonatologist. Most people probably know what an entomologist is, somebody that studies insects, but an odonatologist may be a little bit of a foreign word, and that is somebody that studies Odonata, which is the insect order for dragonflies and damselflies. It's a really neat group of insects that I've been studying for many years, and have been involved with some work on trying to understand what's going on with their migration. And so I thought I would share a little bit about that this morning.
That's very cool. Well, I'm very excited because I've seen some dragonflies. I saw an eastern pond hawk in my neighborhood not too long ago, and they're pretty cool. So I'm excited to learn more about them.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we'll dive in here then. So people may have seen large aggregations of dragonflies, around their neighborhoods or in parks before. More oftentimes than not, depending upon the time of the year, those are probably feeding swarms. They can be very impressive, mixed species, large numbers. But dragonflies also do migrate, some of them. There are about 16 species in North America out of the over 300 dragonfly species. There are about 16 that are considered strong migrants, that is, they regularly migrate. And these migration patterns in dragonflies have been observed since the 1800s. They've been noted for a long time. You can see, especially in the fall, when you have just large groups moving as one, oftentimes kind of paralleling the coast in the eastern U.S., you'll see thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes even hundreds of thousands, and they oftentimes kind of are in concert with bird migrations. And so that's where some of the observations over time have also come from, because people have been watching bird migrations for a long time. So they move south in the fall, typical migratory pattern, and then they move back north in the spring. In the spring, it's much harder to observe this migration because they're more diffuse. They tend to head back north, not in one big group, and so it's a lot harder to kind of observe this migration as they move back north. It's multi-generational. So in some respects, this may start to sound a little bit like the monarch migration, if people are familiar with that. Monarch is a very well-known butterfly found in actually many places across the world, but in North America, east of the Rockies, it has this amazing migratory event where it flies south from Canada, southern and mid-latitudes of Canada, south all the way to Michoacan, Mexico. And they will roost there by the millions. And then they will start to head back, take several generations to move back further north, and then start the whole process over again. One of the things that's amazing about monarchs is they all go to basically the same general area every year, and that is a remarkable uh, feat of navigation. And unfortunately, dragonflies don't seem to do that. I would love if there was like this Shangri-La of dragonflies where they would all go and hang from trees over winter, but that's not what happens. So we'll compare dragonfly migration to this monarch migration a little bit. Just kind of keep that story of the monarchs in the back of your head. So I mentioned that there are about 16 species of dragonflies in North America that are known to migrate. Of those, there are about 5 that are really easy to recognize, and this group that I've been involved with called the Migratory Dragonfly Partnership, I'll talk a little bit more about that later, have really focused on. And so here I'm showing you pictures of all 5 of these. One of the reasons that we chose these 5 species to really focus on is because they are identifiable for the most part on the wing with just a little bit of experience. And I'm going to talk about 2 of these in particular a bit more this morning because probably the most obvious in some respects to a lot of folks, but also they represent 2 different models of migration, 2 quite different models. So what we have here is on the left, Anax junius, or the common green darner, and on the right, the wandering glider, or Pantalophlebescens. And I'm going to start with the wandering glider and talk a little bit about how it migrates. Again, it is a different model than what we'll talk about a little bit later with the common green darner. So this species is found truly worldwide. It's got an incredibly cosmopolitan distribution. It's one of the first dragonflies that I tend to see when I travel internationally. I get off of an airplane and oftentimes see these flying around a tarmac. And one of the reasons for that is that they are notorious. Well, they breed in temporary rain puddles, and they're notorious for you could say making a mistake or falling into an ecological trap is what we call it, where they will mistake a car hood, asphalt, things like that reflect back kind of a water signature to its eyes, and they will try to lay eggs. So if you've ever seen a dragonfly laying eggs on a car hood, chances are it could well have been this species. So it's found worldwide, very common here in North America, though, certainly in Alabama. Breeds in these temporary rain pools, and will migrate thousands of miles over several generations, as you'll hear in just a minute. Because they are breeding in these temporary rain pools, they have to have a very fast life cycle as a nymph. So it's one of the fastest, especially for dragonflies. They can go from basically early instar nymph to an adult within about 30 days or a month, a little over a month. They can also withstand being dried out. So I should back up and say that dragonfly and damselfly larvae or nymphs are aquatic. They are their life cycle takes place in the water, and then when they emerge, the adult is flying around. So, but these guys this species in particular, can withstand being dried up for a period of time, which is again just an adaptation to being able to breed in these temporary rain pools. The migration with this species may well be obligatory, meaning that it may in fact be a necessary part of its life cycle. We're still trying to understand what's going on with the species here in North America. But it has actually been worked out pretty well in the other side of the world, in southern Africa and southern India. And over there, this species will start off basically in August and in the fall in southern India, and then follow the monsoons and start moving towards southern Africa, crossing the Maldives and the Seychelles, these oceanic island chains out there. Here showing coming into Mozambique, and then they a round trip back from southern Africa, like Mozambique, all the way back to southern India. And this total trip may take some 11,000 miles, some 4 generations. It actually is longer than what the monarch does. So this is now considered the longest migratory route for any insect. This record is held by this dragonfly. And it's a really neat story because it's following these monsoons. One of the reasons that this was kind of discovered by Charles Anderson, who's a marine biologist that did research in the Seychelles. He's not a dragonfly person, or wasn't before he kind of discovered this anyway. But he was doing research, diving in the Seychelles and Maldives, and kept seeing these enormous swarms of dragonflies coming through. But there's no fresh water on the islands. So it was like, what's going on here? So he kind of put out a network or contacted a network of his colleagues in the region, and ultimately was able to figure out what is going on with this multi-generational flight. These guys can get quite high and just follow the wind currents, allowing them to be able to make these large migratory routes. So I encourage you to go see Charles Anderson's TED Talk. He's a great speaker, and he goes into the story in a little bit more detail. So if this is something that's interesting to you, then I would encourage you to do that. You can just Google Dragonfly Migration and TED Talk, and you will find it. Here in North America, we have that wandering glider in North America. It does breed in rain pools, and we're still trying to figure out exactly what's happening there. We have not worked out a specific route like Anderson did that could be happening here. But we have a little bit more information about another dragonfly which follows a different model of migration here, and that's called the common green darner, or Anax junius. This is a slightly larger dragonfly. And it's green and blue. One thing I meant to actually point out, and I'm going to see if I can't go backwards here. Actually, either one of these slides will work. One morphological adaptation that you can tell from migratory dragonflies, like that they are migratory in a lot of cases, is if you look at that hind wing, it's really broad and large relatively. And that's because these things can glide for long distances on that. And so you'll see that in these different migratory species, also here in the common green darner. So this, in the New World, in North and South America, it has some vagrant records outside of the Americas, but it's very common within the Americas. It's a regular annual migrant, meaning it's a very predictable migration that can be observed from southern Canada into the southern U.S. and down to Veracruz. And what's really fascinating about these guys is that you can have residents and migrants, so residents and migrant individuals in it's unclear if there are any logical differences with these guys. You know, a migrant and a resident in the same pond, can you recognize them because of behavioral differences or physiological differences? There don't appear to be any genetic differences that we've been able to recognize thus far. And unlike the wandering glider, where the migration event is likely obligatory in most, in the common green darner, it is more facultative, or what that means is it may or may not migrate. I'm not going to use the word choice because you'll see there's a little bit more involved in that, but it may or may not migrate. So here I'm showing a graph from a study done by May and Matthews in 2008. It was kind of looking at a pond, these common green darners in a pond in southern Ontario, and it was basically a recreation of the study that was done by another ornithologist, Trottier, in 1971, about 40 years earlier. And what you see here, this graph may look a little complicated at first, but really it's not. What you see here is you've got two different generations or two different types of common green darners. You have migrants that are coming in with these dashed lines and then leaving, and you have the residents, which are the dotted lines. So what happens is you've got migrants that come in the early spring and actually late spring and early summer. They're in southern Ontario, and they start laying eggs. So that's what's happening in this event right here. You'll see coming through here. Let me restart that over. You have the migrants. These are the residents. I think I said that reversed earlier. The dashed line are the residents. The dotted lines are the migrants. So you have the migrants that are coming in, this dashed line from the south. Shoot, I'm sorry. I keep saying that wrong. I need to back up here again. We'll blame this on technology, even though it's all me. These are the residents. The dashed line is the residents that are coming in here, and the dotted line are the migrants. So the dashed line are the residents that are living in this pond, overwintering as nymphs. And they're maturing. They will emerge in the late spring, early summer, which is what you're seeing right here. That's this emergence peak. And then the dotted line are the migrants that have come in from southern latitudes, so maybe even Alabama, and they're laying in eggs right here. And so those nymphs take a very quick, just a couple of months to develop, as opposed to the residents that take the entire fall and winter to develop. And so you get two different peaks. You have a peak of the residents, which is first, and a peak of the migrants, which is second, later in the summer. And this helped us to first kind of understand, that in fact we do have both residents and migrants in the same body of water, the same pond. Historically, they could be recognized because there were two different peaks. The earlier one in the summer by the residents, later in the summer by the migrants. But interesting, people often ask about climate change and dragonflies. And here's an example, a real example of data where you can see what happens. These peaks used to be basically distinct. But with climate change, those peaks are starting to blur together a bit. And so it can be hard to tell when you're looking at an adult now in Southern Ontario whether it's. Hopefully everybody understood that. I didn't confuse that too much. We're going to come back and I'm going to give you more details about, with another study, what's come out from it. So that's just simply looking at the nymphs and the adults in a body of water and understanding what they're doing. Trying to figure out where they go, though, in terms of actually migrating is another problem, right? And so one way to do that is what they've done with monarchs, which is you tag the monarch wings in one location, you recollect them, hopefully, in another location, and you know where they have flown from. This is the same with bird tagging. Well, monarchs lend themselves to that very well because, first of all, they're easy to catch, relatively. You can rear them, so you can rear a bunch and then release them. And probably most importantly, for these migratory ones, they tend to all aggregate in one general area. So it makes it, your odds of recapturing one is much higher. Yeah, dragonflies do any of those things.
Yeah, I had a question about that, John, because I've seen dragonflies fly, and they're really fast.
Like net out of the air. That's right. They are quite challenging to collect. If you ever look at a dragonfly up close, the eyes make up the majority of the head. They can really see. They have fantastic vision, probably the best vision in the insect world. And that allows them to, stay just outside of net range, basically. So they can be quite challenging to catch. They also don't all, as I mentioned earlier, go to the same spot. We know that. It would be fantastic if they did, but they don't all go to the same spot and overwinter. They overwinter as nymphs, as immatures. So the chances of being able to recapture one is also very difficult. And then in terms of rearing them, these are predators. So unlike the monarchs with caterpillars where you can raise them really easily, with the dragonflies, they're predators. You have to raise another animal, live animal, to feed it. So it's much more challenging, and that's just not a very feasible way, basically, to mimic the way that they've done it with monarchs. So then, other thoughts will be, well, why don't we just slap a radio tag on them? Radio telemetry has gotten, the technology with that has gotten better and better and smaller and smaller. And so, in fact, you can put radio tags on insects. And here you're seeing one put on a common green darner. But because, the technology has not gotten so good that they can be so small, it's still that they need a battery to charge them and to transmit. And so usually you can't receive or pick up a signal very far. The transmitter itself is quite large on the subject. You can see here, even for this large dragonfly, that would be cumbersome to fly around. Nonetheless, a researcher from Princeton did put a few radio tags on these common green darners, and he was a pilot, and so he actually flew in a plane following around these guys and tracking them. And what he found is that on just a few individuals, he was able to track, and basically they would fly an average of about 12 miles a day. Max of is nearly 90 miles a day, though. And they tended to either go in kind of the short range, like if they were just going short distances, they would tend to go in different directions. Or if they were longer distances, they tended to be very directional and parallel the coast. They tended to correct if they started to go out over the ocean. So this confirmed, some of the general observations that had been made about these guys migrating, especially along the East Coast. And the U.S. Forest Service, who looks into bird migration, migratory species like that, including monarchs, came up with some funding to look at dragonfly migration. And they were able to give us some funding through the Xerces Society, which is a great insect conservation society. If you're interested in the conservation, preservation of insects, I encourage you to go look them up, donate to them. They do a lot of fantastic work. But I was involved with something called the Migratory Dragonfly Partnership that evolved out of that. And what we decided to do was create two different citizen science initiatives or portals to help try to enlist basically all these enthusiastic dragonfly folks out there to help us figure out where these dragonflies were going. Because again, traditional tagging didn't make much sense. Radio tagging isn't going to get us very much. So we decided to try to enlist, citizen scientists. So we created two different portals. They're very strongly connected. And in fact, the back end of these websites is the same. So you might say, well, why are there two different ones? It's because they're really addressing two different parts of the migration. The Migratory Dragonfly Partnership on the right is meant to record observations about actual migratory events. And those, again, if you remember, would happen in the fall. And that's the website that we first created. And then we were all excited about it. We launched it and waiting for people to report these observations. And we realized, it's hard to get a lot of enthusiasm around that because it's not very many people are actually going to see these migratory events. They are limited to around the coastline, and they're very temporal, right? They're just moving through. So it's an event that not a lot of people actually see or witness. Plus, it doesn't really address anything about the spring migration because, again, it's hard to recognize dragonflies migrating back northward in the spring. So we created another citizen science initiative called Pond Watch. And this was focused on the spring migration by having people choose a pond in their neighborhood and then monitor it, both for the presence and absence of our target 5 species of dragonflies. So the idea is you would go out and record, ideally daily or, bi-weekly, whatever you can, and indicate whether you saw these species or not. And you would indicate whether you did not see them as well. We were collecting negative data too. This is great, and we accumulated a heck of a lot of data from this because it allows us to track when these migratory species would first reach certain latitudes, right? By people documenting them at their ponds all across the US. So I encourage you to go to those two websites if you're interested in participating in helping us to collect some data. And then a very recent study by Hallworth et al. Used some of that data to look at basically when these species were first coming in, these migratory species were first hitting the different latitudes in the US. And what they found was basically a thermocline of around 48 degrees Fahrenheit when basically the average temperature reached 48 degrees at a certain latitude. That's when you started seeing these migratory species hitting those latitudes. And so it was a very nice pattern and kind of predictor of when you would expect to see these dragonflies moving northward. It still doesn't help us figure out exactly where these things are going to or coming from, though. And so a group used isotopic analysis, used isotopes to help figure this out. It's basically a form of mark and recapture, but one that could be utilized with dragonflies. So isotopes are just variations of elements that are naturally occurring and are stable out in the environment. And what's fun, I like to show this slide because there are isotopes like deuterium that you can extract out of water. And it turns out that the ratio of these isotopes has a unique signature that corresponds with the latitude within the US. It tends to break down a little bit as you get into real mountainous areas, but especially east of the Rockies, there's a pretty obvious kind of pattern that correlates to these isotopic ratios in the latitude. So this map is simply showing you that a little CSI here, forensics, you can actually detect where the tap water in your canned or bottled beverages comes from by looking at the isotopic ratios in it. And that's what this map is showing you here, basically. So you might be in Tuscaloosa opening a bottle of Coke, but if you were to actually sample the water out of that, look at the isotopes, you could tell where the tap water came that was used in that Coke by using a map like this. The same idea was then used to look at dragonflies. And this has been done with birds and other organisms as well. And so what happens is, remember, the dragonflies, the nymphs, are aquatic. They're growing up in ponds and streams and bodies of water. So if you basically look at the isotopic ratios in those bodies of waters across latitudes, you can create a cliental map like this that gives you an idea of where these things originated. Because while the nymph is in the water, it's going to be absorbing that unique isotopic ratio, in this case, deuterium, an isotope of hydrogen. This is not pinpoint. It does not tell you, like a GPS coordinate. I wish it did, but it will give you, again, a latitude of generally where these things might be from. So what we were able to do is actually cut off the wing of dragonfly specimens in collections. The University of Alabama's collection was involved with this. These researchers, well, actually, I cut off a pair of wings for these researchers. They then ground them up, extracted the isotopic ratio, because the wings developed, in the case of dragonflies, they develop by the nymph while it's in the water. And then once they emerge and they're an adult, that unique signature of the isotopes does not change in the wing. So it becomes, again, kind of a what am I trying to say? A thumbprint of where the dragonfly grew up. So this group of researchers looked at some 852 wings across numerous collections spanning like 140 years, a really vast array of individuals. And this is a great plug for why collections are so important. Without collections, this research and helping us to understand what these dragonflies are doing would not have been possible. So what they found is that this common green darner goes through about 3 different generations in North America with its migration. Basically, individuals will start in the spring. The black dots on these maps indicate where the wings were collected from, where the individuals were collected from. And then the red on all of these maps indicates where those individuals originated from. And so what's happening here is that we know that individuals early in the year are coming from southern latitudes. They're emerging from southern latitudes. Then as the year progresses, the individuals that are collected up in the northern latitudes, you can see where they're originating from. So we know they're not, the darker the red is where the individuals are coming from. So they basically, individuals are emerging in the spring in the south, flying north, some on average, and then laying eggs and dying in the north. That's the first generation. And then a second generation will emerge either in the summer and lay eggs again, and then those individuals will overwinter, or they will. That's if they go through a slower life cycle, or they will go through a faster life cycle, get another generation off in the summer, and then start to head back again in the late summer, early fall. And what this tends to depend upon is photoperiod and temperature. So what it really boils down to is when the female dragonfly is able to oviposit in these northern latitudes dictates whether the offspring are going to be resident and overwinter or whether they're going to be migratory. If they are able to get up and lay eggs in the early part of the season, so basically, midsummer, they can get a generation through that then would start to emerge and start to head back south. If they are laying eggs in the late summer, early fall, they're not going to be able to do that. And so the individuals will remain in the pond as nymphs in those northern latitudes, become non-migratory, and stay up there. And then emerge in that next spring. So you have, two generations that are actually have migratory movements, and then a third non-migratory generation that's involved in this the species moving across North America. It's really amazing and fascinating system. So I wanted to provide, before I take some questions, wanted to provide some and talk about some resources that we have out there. I have another citizen science website called Odonata Central, which is devoted to basically keeping track of distributional records for dragonflies across North America. There's lots of resources on there and lots of people that can help identify dragonflies. All the records are vetted. So you can be confident in your species that you submit. And then the two resources that I mentioned earlier specific to migration, the Migratory Dragonfly Partnership, which helps to document actual migratory events in the fall, and then the spring migration event can be documented through PondWatch, pondwatch.org or .com. Which allows you to monitor a pond in your neighborhood on a regular basis. On both of these websites, we have a lot of really cool resources. And Rebecca, maybe if you can flip to me now. I wanted to show some of the resources that you can actually download off of these websites. This is a folder that the MDP created, MDP being Migratory Dragonfly Partnership, that's got all sorts of great things in it. We created a field guide to the migratory dragonflies. So it's got the species that migrate, how to identify them, and things that they could be confused with. You can download this directly from the website. We have a nice pamphlet about the Migratory Dragonfly Partnership, the different protocols that we were doing, and what you know, if you get involved in it, what you need to do. Lots of great imagery and instructions about what's going on with dragonfly migration. And then if you're interested in creating a pond, let's see which way I need to go here, a pond that would be attractive to dragonflies, I encourage you to do that. And we've created a book here on how to, what you need to do to create a pond specifically for attracting dragonflies. And so it's called Backyard Ponds. All of these resources, while I'm holding hard copies here, all of these are available as free PDF or the My Partnership. Lots of other resources on there as well, so I encourage you to check those out. There are virtual images where you can rotate these migratory species around and look at them from all different directions to get a better idea of what they look like. So it's just a quick overview of what is happening with dragonfly migration in North America and what we know. And if there are any questions out there, I'd be happy to take those. Let's see. So, do dragonflies return to the same locations or ponds each year? And we don't think so. We don't know that for sure, but we don't think so. The same species will, is very likely, but not the same individuals. So not like birds or even monarchs coming to, repeating to the same general area. You will see the same species though, but not the same. Well, certainly not the same individuals because of different generations, but you can see the same species.
I have a question, John. Since I've seen some dragonflies down by a lake near my house, I was wondering, do dragonflies have issues with any other insects or birds? Do they have problem species that affect them in any way? Are there birds or insects that can harm them or go after them?
There are a few insects that are capable of taking down a dragonfly, some robber flies and things like that. But dragonflies are pretty voracious predators themselves. So there's not a lot of insects that go after them, but birds certainly are their main predators. And around ponds, frogs and things like that are capable of getting them. There are some, insectivorous birds, some raptors, for example, whose migration, they migrate as well. There's evidence to suggest that their migration may be tied to the dragonfly migration. So they basically follow dragonflies, and likely one of the reasons for doing that is as a food source. These migratory events are phenomenal, both for the birds and the dragonflies. We have gone down to Veracruz, an area that's called the River of Raptors, where basically all these birds just come through and are funneled in this migratory route. And dragonflies are as well. And the dragonflies can be so thick as they're coming through there that there are people down there counting the raptors, looking up and counting them, that the dragonflies can be so thick that they can't see through them to count the raptors. So you can have just these phenomenal events, and they do seem to be likely tied together.
Yeah, I just get concerned for the dragonflies because there are a lot of Canada geese near that lake, and they are sometimes very frightening. So I get concerned sometimes that the dragonflies are affected by the geese. So we do have another question.
Yeah, probably not too much. Are there dragonfly counts like there are butterfly counts? Yeah, so there are not. It's not nearly as well organized, I guess, or structured as like pollard counts with butterflies. This is where people will go out, just like with birds, and they'll specifically look for species and count them. There's a way of doing that called pollard counts with butterflies. We are starting to try to do that more and more with dragonflies. Odonata Central that I just mentioned, we just relaunched that website. It's a completely new website, and one of the things that is different about this new version is that it actually allows the user to indicate the number of individuals of a dragonfly that they're seeing at a particular place. So we're starting to be able to collect that data digitally. And then in terms of local groups organizing dragonfly counts, there are a few. They're not nearly as common as certainly butterflies or birds, but I think it will become more and more popular, certainly because the resources for identifying dragonflies on the wing have become more and more prevalent and better.
Well, it looks like we don't have any more questions from the chat, but feel free if you have any comments or questions, drop them in the comment section. But John, I thought maybe we could just wrap up here and leave us with your closing thoughts. What would you want people to take away from your interest and your excitement about dragonflies?
Sure. So people often ask me why I got into dragonflies, and they're just amazing insects. If you've never really looked at them, I encourage you to just watch one next time you see one out around a pond or a stream. They are among the best predators in the insect world, with the best vision, the best flyers, incredibly agile. And when you're looking at a particular species around a pond, just keep in mind, here in Tuscaloosa, that dragonfly might have originated, especially if it's in the fall, might have originated from southern Canada. They can, travel really long distances. There are certainly well-documented accounts, I didn't mention it earlier, but of migratory dragonflies crossing the ocean, crossing the Atlantic. So they are phenomenal flyers and gliders that way. And if you're interested in insects and have just never really gotten into dragonflies, I encourage you to consider them. They are a fun group with lots of resources out there now that is great to get into and learn about. And there's still a lot of things to learn about. That's one of the things that I guess I would also say is these citizen science initiatives are very popular because dragonflies are very popular amongst enthusiasts. I'll leave you with, oftentimes the sequence of events, because people have been watching birds for a long time avocationally, is they'll say that birders have gone bad when they get into butterflies. And butterflies are oftentimes the gateway insect for enthusiasts. But then what happens a lot of times is butterflies have been looked at for so long, it's harder to make real contributions as an enthusiast to the butterfly world. And so then they get into dragonflies. So I always say it's butterflies gone smart when they get into dragonflies.
That's really funny. I can imagine why that is, because not only are they amazing flyers, dragonflies, but they're beautiful. I happened to catch them when they would stop and sit on a rock, and just really pretty. The colors in some of those dragonflies, and just the wings, what the wings are like. It's just for me, I'm a very visual person, so it's really neat to see how beautiful and different each of them are. So I like it from the visual aesthetic look of it as well. So they are not only great flyers and really neat in terms of the insect aspect of the migration, and sort of if you're interested in insects, I think if you're a visual person or an artist or something like that, I think you would be taken with how pretty they are.
They are a common subject. You can't go into a store and not see dragonflies as models, on whether it's dinnerware or sheets or, just vases, any number of things. We have art of dragonflies all over the house. And it is because, like you say, Rebecca, they're just really captivating and beautiful animals.
Well, that is really cool. Well, I think, John, I think we'll just go ahead and wrap it up for this Museums from Your Home live stream about dragonflies and dragonfly migration. So thank you for taking us through that. I'll definitely be keeping an eye out for more dragonflies around me. We'll be doing this every weekday, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. And each day will feature a different aspect of UA museums. Tomorrow, we're actually going to be coming back to the Alabama Museum of Natural History's Facebook page, and we're going to be having a Family Friday. So if you've got a family and you have some kids, that'll be a good day to come and hang out with us tomorrow at 10 a.m. If you would like to learn more about what we're doing here with Museums from Your Home, you can visit museums.ua.edu/museums from your home. That's going to be your one-stop shop for everything that we're doing here. It's got the links to all of our locations for the live streams. It's got our schedule. It's got archived live streams. So if you've missed any, you can go back and watch this or watch any of the past live streams that we've done. We also have educational material from Discovering Alabama and the Alabama Museum of Natural History, as well as Mountainville Archaeological Park. So if you have anything that you want to learn about from the museums, you can find that there. We also have a UA Museums coloring book from the #ColorOurCollections event that happened earlier this year. So if you've got some little ones, or if you just want to do some coloring as a therapeutic exercise, you can find that at museums.ua.edu/museums from your home. If you are enjoying what we're doing here and you would like to support UA Museums, you can go to give.ua.edu/museums. That's a way to become a supporting member of UA Museums, and that's a great way to give and donate. If you would like to keep up with all of our video content that we've got going on, we've created a lot of awesome video content. I might be a little biased, but if you want to keep up with our live streams, and if you never want to miss a live stream, if you subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/UA Museums, that will notify you anytime we go live, and it will also let you know anytime we have any new video content, like our Mountainville Mondays or our isolation observations that we've been doing. That's all in one place at our YouTube channel. So you can go to youtube.com/UA Museums and subscribe there. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for us today. But thank you to everybody who is watching and everybody who's going to watch this in the future. But thank you for visiting UA Museums from your home. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Abbott. Hope you have a great day.
Thank you.